Hi everybody, this is Carol from the Society of Thoracic Surgeons. This is the Adult Cardiac version 4.2 upgrade call for April 30th. It'll go from 3 to 4 o'clock Central Time. I apologize if you joined at 2, or were trying to join at 2 o'clock. We had a TBT webinar that was ran over, but we kind of planned on that, so we sent out notification. We changed the time last week for this webinar to an hour later and sent out notification yesterday, and it was posted on the website. So I apologize if you joined, but we're here now, so get going with that. On the call with me, this is Carol from STS. On the call with me, I have Melinda Offer, who is our consultant who manages the FAQ mailbox, and from STS staff, I have Leanne Jones and Catherine Holyfield, and then Dave Warmuth is on. Dr. Warmuth is on with us. He's been helping with the upgrades for the informatics task force. He's a general thoracic surgeon, and he's been involved with this upgrade since the beginning parts of it. We're going to walk through the CABG, starting with the CABG section, so section J. So please open your books to section J, and then we're going to get started, and then we'll take questions towards the end. Depending on how many questions we have when we get to that section, get through section J, we'll either stop there or we'll continue on into the valve explant section. And then again, please use the Q&A function to submit your questions. The chat box is shut down, so Q&A function only, and we'll answer as many questions as possible. We'll answer as many questions as possible, and we encourage you to provide your questions so we can get you feedback. And before we end, I just want to, so we don't have to go back to these slides, the next monthly webinar we have the update and the data warehouse transition is May 6th, and then May 20th is the user group call, and May 28th is the version 4.2 walkthrough call. These times are at 2 o'clock, but I would suggest some folks don't seem to be getting the emails when we send out updated times, if that ever has to happen for whatever reason. We try to not do that, but if there's something special that happened, like with the TBT webinar today, we had to push this back. So I suggest making sure you check out the sts.org website to check the times of the webinars the day before or even earlier in the week. We usually would, if we're going to change it, we usually try to do that as quick as we can, so we don't screw up your schedules too much. Okay, so I'm going to stop this guy, and I'm going to go over to the data collection forms now. The first thing I wanted to talk about before we get into section J was we did send out a version update to the vendors, and we're now going to be using version 4.20.2. This was updated on April 14th, so after we had last talked for the upgrade. And I just wanted to show you, if you're interested in what the changes were made. Primarily, it was a parent-child relationship change that was not, identified on the data collection form. It was correct on the data collection form, except the programming that was sent in the data specifications was incorrect. So that had to be fixed. So when we fixed that, we tidied up a couple other things like spelling errors, and I think we had one option where the harvest code was missing or not in order. So a couple of items like that. There's a list. If you've already gone through this form, I know some sites have gone through this form in detail. If you've gone through it and you want to review what those changes are, this is the adult cardiac section of 4.20, and then there's this itemized changes from 4.20.1 to 4.20.2 that's posted, and it'll walk you through what the types of changes. We just made some changes to definitions, a spelling error, things like that. So feel free, that's where that information is at if you'd like to view that. The surgeon worksheets will probably be out in June or July. You could always use, if you would like to start making those for your surgeons and you want to customize those, you could always use the Word documents that are posted of the data collection form and pull out sections that you think are going to help you. What we provide is just a basic template that's meant to be changed up for customized for your site. So feel free, if you don't want to wait until June or July for that form, if you want to get started on it, you can certainly go ahead and do that using the Word versions that are posted. And then I think that we have the data specifications, software specifications have all been updated. So I'm going to go over now to section J, and we're going to start here for her today. Get down here. Okay. Sorry, I should have had this all scrolled down already. Oopsie. Okay. So again, not again, I haven't told you yet today. On the left is the highlighted and changed. The highlighted yellow are things that were deleted. The highlighted blue are things that were added. On the right, it's just the highlighted blue. The yellow sections have been removed. So I'm going to work on the one on the right, which is the clean version. And we added internal mammary, yes or no, and that's the parent to was it a left internal mammary, right internal mammary. We added not applicable or not available if it's not dictated. We added that here, so you could select that as the same impact as selecting no. And then we have reason for internal mammary. The same 5 choices that we've had in the previous versions. Subclavian stenosis, previous mediastinal radiation, no bypassable LED disease, previous cardiac or thoracic surgery, and emergent or salvage procedure. And then we have these 2 other fields, one that says other acceptable STS provided exclusion, and another that says other not STS acceptable exclusion. If your choice is not listed here, one of these 5 choices, and you're to go into the training manual and see if we provided any specific exclusions that the surgeon leadership has approved to be coded as other acceptable STS exclusions. If you are not seeing it listed there, then before you enter other not acceptable STS exclusion, please send in an FAQ to Melinda so we can bring that then back to the surgeon leaders and get clarification. It may be a reason that is acceptable. It just hasn't been submitted to us yet, and we don't want you to code that as an unacceptable reason without it being reviewed first. And Melinda, are you able to, do you want to provide any further information on that, or did I cover that correctly for us?
No, it sounds great. It's just the only thing is when the surgeons review it, and sometimes that takes a couple of weeks, we'll send an answer back to you, and that answer you will want to make sure that you keep in case of an audit, so that you have that documentation.
Oh, that's great. Yep, so make sure you keep the email that Melinda or I will send back to you. You can, if your hospital allows you to scan it into the chart, you can certainly do that, or if you keep paper copies of your data collection forms, just put it along with that, and make sure that you include it with your audit materials if your site is ever to be audited. That's a great point, Melinda. Thank you. The next part that we get down to is the distal anastomoses with arterial conduits. And I kind of wanted to take a second here to talk about composite grafts when we're doing bypasses, abstracting bypasses that use composite grafts, how we are to collect those if the grafts are made up of 2 different types of material, meaning arterial and venous. So I had, let's see here if I can pull it up. I just want to show you a picture. I wasn't able to find a very clear picture about what a composite graft would look like. I thought I had one, but I couldn't find it. So I wanted to show, we'll just take this guy. Okay, so this is a vein graft. This is it's going from the aorta to, this is the RCA. Whoopsie. It's going from the aorta to the RCA. This is a total vein graft. So for this, you would code this as a vein graft. If this part, or say you're over here, this is an arterial graft, and part of this arterial graft, it wasn't able to reach down to the end of this section, and they added on a piece of vein graft to make it longer. That becomes a composite graft. The part that attaches into the myocardium, or into the muscle of the aorta, of the heart, which would be considered the distal end of the graft, that is how you would capture that graft. So for an artery graft, that you have the proximal piece, which is up here, is artery, and then you add on a little piece of vein graft to get down to the rest, you're going to code this as a vein graft. And the reason why it is because this graft will act like whatever the distal piece of it, whatever the distal portion of that graft is made up of. That's how that graft will act physiologically act. So if you had an artery and then an artery graft, you would code it as an artery. If you had, say, a vein graft and you added on a little piece of, I guess a little piece of artery, it would act as an artery graft. So then you would code that as an artery graft. So it's whatever piece of the graft goes into the coronary artery to provide the blood supply at the distal portion. So that's how you capture the composite grafts. So for example, let me scoot this screen out of the way. Okay. So for example, here on the right-hand side under the blue distal anastomosis with arterial graft, if you had a vein graft that had a little arterial extension added on to reach its destination into the myocardium, you're going to code that as an arterial graft. That would count as the numbers of arterial grafts. You would not count it as a venous graft, even though part of it is venous. It's the part that connects into, it's the distal anastomosis conduit. So whatever that distal anastomosis conduit is made of is what you're going to capture it as. And then we have, distal anastomosis, arterial conduit, and then the count, and was it a radial, and then the count of radial artery conduits, and then the timing on radial artery conduit. Then we get down to the distal anastomoses with venous conduit, yes or no. And again, if this started off, say, as an internal mammary, lima to the LAD, and you had to add on a piece of vein graft at the end of that internal mammary to reach the destination, you're going to code that as a venous. That's an example for how you would capture a composite graft. If you have just a saphenous vein graft going from the LAD to the OM or whatever, something simple, simple like that, you're going to capture that as just a straight, as a venous graft as well. So you code that yes, and then number of distal venous conduits, and the saphenous vein harvest prep time. And then the proximal techniques have stayed the same. And then we kind of switched this grid up a little bit. This is the current grid on the left is from version 2.9. And the grid on the right here is what we're going with now. We wanted to what had happened, the reason why this was so granular on the left, where we had all of these sites here, these distals, we had, diagonal 1 through 3 OMs, 1 through 3 acute marginal, all of this so granular, is that at one point in time we were looking at using this database to develop appropriate use criteria. And we never had gotten, the task force that was working on that, we never got that far to develop the criteria. And when we discussed about why are we capturing this, or why do we need to get so granular with it, the decision was made that we actually don't need to get as granular with that as we were trying for, if we ever do decide to do appropriate use criteria, we could just use the branches. So that's what we want to collect here. So we have the left main coronary artery, the LAD, the diagonal. We don't need to break down diagonal 1, 2, or 3, the ramus, the circ, the obtuse marginal, RCA, PDA, posterior lateral, acute marginal, and none. The proximal sites are aorta, T-graft off of the artery, T-graft off of the vein, and other, in situ internal mammary, and then other. Now, if there's a Y graft, you're going to capture that as other. And we'll provide clarity on that in the training manual. That was one of the choices I think that we previously had here somewhere. We had Y graft, natural Y vein graft here. So these are the only choices we'll be using. It's hopefully that will make it a little bit easier to extract. You're going to start with the first graft, and then these will be drop downs. We have side to side or end to side. And I had a good picture of that, and I accidentally shut my computer screen down, but let me see if I can pull it up here real quick. Okay, and then we'll see what comes up when I do this. Okay, I won't get there, but I'll go back there in a second. So, here's a good one. Okay, so this is what a side-to-side graft looks like. And that's, if you're wondering, that's what it looks like. I know that you're not going to be looking at diagrams like this when you're abstracting the chart, but just to have an idea of what a side-to-side graft looks like. And then an end-to-side graft is the end of the artery going into the side, so the end of the vein going into the side, end of the vessel going into the other side of the vessel is what that will look like. It could be artery or vein. I'm sorry, I just meant vessel. And then the endarterectomy is on the native vessel, or whatever is being bypassed into, that's where that endarterectomy applies. And then I guess this is pretty much, I'm done with this section. Melinda, do you have anything else to add to here that I may have missed? I know we talked earlier. Can't remember everything we had talked about.
No, I think we just talked, the only thing we talked about is a Y graft would probably be captured as other in the new version. And I think that's
right. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to keep going on here. The questions that I have so far, I don't see very many that are related here that we can get back to these in a second. So I'm just going to go on into K here very quickly and see what comes up here. This is the explant section. So we changed this a little bit. This whole section used to be called K, and we didn't have it broken out where it was aortic section had its own letter, or mitral section had its own letter. So to work with the parent-child relationship specifically, as the aorta section has really affected this, we broke out these sections a little bit further. So the valve surgery explant section is K. And no major real changes here. We did add this transcatheter valve and valve with prosthetic valve as the explant type. For patients who are doing a transcatheter procedure, I am almost 100% certain that if you have a transcatheter procedure and you're doing a valve fracturing, that does not indicate that that's an open procedure. To me, that would indicate that that's another transcatheter procedure. So you're going in, you're putting a balloon into the previous valve, you're expanding that balloon, and you're fracturing that valve to open up the annulus, to open up the hole where the valve sits, to put in another valve so that the annulus isn't so small so you can get better blood flow. And then you put in another valve, and typically, and I might not be 100% accurate, but I do believe that that only occurs in transcatheter valve cases. So we do not capture, we do capture transcatheter valve cases if you would like to put them in. They are not required for the STS registry. If they're doing a valve fracturing with that transcatheter valve case, we do not capture that in the STS registry. That is captured. I know we do capture valve fracturing in TVT, just not in the ACSD. So we have, just to clarify that point, because I think it probably will come up when more sites are entering in their TVT cases if they'd like. When we do, so the explant type, we added autograft and then just the transcatheter valve, and we had a choice for PANIS for explant etiology and corrected the spelling of thrombus. And then year of implant known, yes or no, and a year. So if you have that, if you know the previous year of the valve that's, or the implant year of the valve that's being explanted, that sometimes can be found on the patient's card if they have that from the previous valve, along with the model number if that's available. And then we did add same changes for the second valve prosthesis explant. And we did have a few cases last year where we saw that a patient was actually having 3 valve explants in one procedure, really rare, but it was still happening, and we didn't want to not capture that information. So we added in a 3rd valve prosthesis explant. Again, if you only have 1 explant and you answer no to the second valve explant, all of this will gray out, so you shouldn't need to answer that. The next section is the aortic valve without concomitant aorta procedure. So this section will only open if you have AVA aortic proc perf, and let me show you where that is at. I know we went over it last time in the operative section, but just to give a quick refresher on it. This is the operative section. This is where you're selecting the procedures. You've selected that if an aorta procedure was done, yes. And then you get down to the valve procedure section. Oh yes, an aortic valve procedure was done. I'm going to select yes. Was a valve explanted? Not for this patient, so I'm going to select no. The next question is, was it an aortic valve procedure? Yep, they had an aortic valve procedure. If you answered any of the yeses to that, the next question is, was this procedure performed on the aorta? If you answer yes to this, this will not open up the K1 section. This will only open up the aorta section. Now going back the other way, you select no to aorta procedure. You select no to valve procedure, yes. Valve explanted, no. You get down to the aorta procedure yes. Or I'm sorry, aortic valve procedure, yes. Was a procedure performed on the aorta? No. This is going to, this no right here is going to open up the aortic valve section. So that's how that section is going to open. So you're not capturing the aortic valve sections in two spots for procedures that are performed on aortic valve and the aorta. You would only fill that in the aorta section, and I'll show you that when we get down to M2, to the section M2. So, okay, aorta procedure, no, but there was an aortic valve procedure. I said no again here. Okay, so the section should open, and the vendors are putting in a check to alert you that if you have inconsistent information, if you say yes in one spot to the aorta procedure and no in the other spot, it's going to alert you, and you shouldn't be allowed to go any further. So you have to be abstracting that consistently and accurately. So, all right, I said that this procedure on the aorta was not performed, so this K1 section is going to open, and then I get into the pretty much not very many. I don't think that we had too many changes here in the aorta section specifically. The only major change that you'll see is that the information on the root procedures has all been moved over to the aorta section. Actually, this whole aorta section has been, aortic valve section is duplicated, different sequence numbers and short names, but it's duplicated over in the aorta section. So for the aortic valve section, all we're capturing here is procedures specifically on the valve. Now, if they do an annulus enlargement, that's still, or an aortic enlargement, that's not considered a procedure on the aorta. That's typically part of an aortic valve procedure. So it's still captured. It's just something that goes along with the territory when you do an aortic valve procedure. So even though they say an aortic and annular enlargement was performed, you're going to capture that here, and it's not going to open up the aorta procedure. If you get above the valve, where the valve sits, then you're going to go into that's where you would start then capturing in the aorta procedure. So we have procedure performed, it was a replacement, and then you can answer your questions here. If it was a transcatheter valve replacement, which is not required to go into the STS database, but if you choose to enter it into the STS database, this is where you would enter that. And then we have surgical valve replacement, yes or no, the type, and then if it was bioprosthetic, was it stented, stentless, subcoronary valve, or sutureless rapid deployment. That's the only questions you have for replacement. And then we get into repair construction. These are all the same choices. We just made this a select all that apply, so you don't have to answer yes or no to, I think it's, I don't know, crazy number of questions. You just select all that apply. And then you get, we added in pannus thrombus removal of the native valve. Now, if you had a procedure that was a thrombus removal that was on a prosthetic valve, that's a different answer. So this is just repair. This is related to the native valve section. We get down here and we say, this surgical prosthetic valve is also a child of this procedure performed. So you have 3 children: replacement, repair, and surgical prosthetic valve intervention, not an explant of that valve. So they performed something on that prosthetic valve. We get down, was it a repair of the prosthetic leak? Was it a removal of a pannus or removal of a clot or other? So that's where the prosthetic valve information will be captured. And then aortic and annular enlargement, and then the techniques that were used, and then this replacement of non-coronary sinus. This is a modified Wheat or modified Jacob procedure, and that's typically how it's charted. Replacement of the non-coronary sinus, or these 2 terms would be used. We can probably do more teaching on this in an upcoming webinar where we teach. We ask the surgeons to provide some more education for all of us on what this looks like and how you can tell in your surgeon's notes what was done there. And then the next question is just, was the valve or valve repair device implanted, and then you enter this information. We don't have to worry about composite devices when you have an aortic valve and maybe a root, because we don't have to capture those. We're not going to capture those here. We're going to capture everything over in the aorta section. And then we get down to the mitral section. And we cleaned this up quite a bit, actually. I think it looks better than what we've had before. We were capturing a lot of information in the mitral section. All of this yellow stuff has been removed. We didn't need to get that granular. It was really difficult to abstract. And quite honestly, if we can't all abstract it at the same level, and some of our surgeons only document minimal, it's not going to help in doing analysis on anything. So we just, no reason to make data managers, to make anybody struggle with this. So we have the mitral valve procedure performed, and then was it a repair? If it was a repair, what surgical or transcatheter? If surgical, you're going to select the type. These were all yes or no before. So now you, I believe they were all yes or no. I think so. Yep. So we have select all that apply for these, and then if you selected leaflet resection, where was the location? What was the method? If you selected neocords, PTFE, where was the location? Chordal transfer, where was the location? These are not select all that apply. It's anterior, posterior, or both. And then anterior chordal or posterior chordal are not documented. And then for the patch, location is here. And then if you go down to the replacement section, we have mitral repair attempt prior to replacement, cords preserved, transcatheter replacement, and then again, the surgical prosthetic valve intervention. The same rules apply. It's not related to an explanted valve. It's related to a procedure performed on the prosthetic valve that remains in the patient. So repair of the leak or pannus or clot or other. And then we get down to implant type, and we added a few here related to transcatheter implant types, since we're seeing more mitral valve transcatheter procedures. Again, the mitral valve transcatheter procedures are not required to be entered into the STS adult cardiac database. They are required to be entered into the TVT database, but sites do choose to enter them into both, and you certainly can. So we added these choices for you here. And then mitral leaflet clip number, if they do put a leaflet clip in, which is here. And then model number, UDI and implant size. I think we're going to be able to get through the valve section, because I just have 21 questions in there, and I'm really going to focus the questions that Melinda and I will tackle. We're going to focus on the upgrade. So if they're not related to the upgrade, we'll get to those at the end if we have time. But I'm going to try to answer all of the upgrade questions, since that's the purpose of this call. Tricuspid. Okay, so back to the tricuspid valve procedure, we have repair, and then if it was a repair, you select all that apply. We have transcatheter, clip device, leaflet resection, pannus thrombus removal, native valve. If it was an annuloplasty, and if it was an annuloplasty, the type of annuloplasty, pericardium, suture, prosthetic ring, prosthetic band, or other. For replacement, if it was a yes, transcatheter valve replacement. And if it was surgical, the prosthetic valve, not explant of the valve, the same choices as the aortic and mitral. And then the implant type we added in transcatheter device, implanted open heart, which means that they had a transcatheter valve implanted, but they implanted it open heart-wise, which they didn't use the catheter to implant that transcatheter device. Pulmonic valve procedure, we just added pannus or thrombus removal and then replacement. And then the same thing, transcatheter device implanted open heart under the implant device type. So I think we're going to stop there for right now and get some questions, see if we can answer some questions for everybody. Let's see. All right, are you ready, Melinda?
Yes, I'm ready, I think.
Okay.
There's a lot of good questions.
Yep. First question, this is related to the, let's see, does the new version include the COVID-19 question? Oh, hold on one second. Okay. Does the new version include the COVID-19 question? We're still going to utilize the temporary fields for that question. I just haven't put them in this form yet. But the plan is to still use those temporary fields because we don't know where we're going to be in a month, or I'm sorry, not a month, in a year, if we still really need to collect that data, or, you know, if we're doing much better with it. So we're going to put those in the temporary fields, just like we did for 2.9. Next question, if you have a graft consisting of a lima with vein graft added distally, how do we answer was the internal mammary used? So we've discussed this question with the surgeon leadership, and Melinda, correct me or step in if I start saying something off. Or
I have the answer.
we have to,
I have
okay,
the answer.
I know the answer is that we would code this, you would still code the lima internal mammary used, yes.
Correct. Any composite that includes part of the IMA will be coded as an IMA.
Right, because we don't want you to lose credit for that for your site, even though that graft is pretty much acting like a vein graft. We don't want you to lose credit for reporting. Next question. So to be sure I understand, if I have an internal mammary and a saphenous vein as a composite, I would code a vein graft because of the distal anastomosis. Is EMA coded no or yes in this case? So you would still code the internal mammary yes, and then you would code, you would count the graft as whatever portion is distal. So the most distal portion of that graft that inserts into the myocardium is what you would be coding it as, but you would still get the credit for the internal mammary usage. When would you use none as a distal site? I think that's what is going to trigger it, so you don't have to enter any more questions. So we, on this one here, I think this is what triggers it, so it doesn't drop down, it doesn't go into any more questions. I'm not really sure if that's correct or not, but I know that we needed to put that there for some reason. I'll have to get back to you on that. Unless you know, Melinda, why we put none there. I know we had a reason, I just can't think of it off the top of my head.
No, actually, I couldn't figure it out either. So I think that's a great question.
But either way, it's there. So if you don't need to use it, don't use it, and it'll just sit there. And we'll have 0 frequency on it when we do the next upgrade, and then it will be removed. Next question, when will the training manual be available? Melinda?
Okay, so I'm working very hard to have it out by the end of May. We are in the final stages where we are asking the surgeons for input on areas that we need input on. And so at times, you know, they respond quickly, and at times they're very busy these days. So I'm hoping that by the end of May, it'll be out.
Great, thank you. If they do a graft to the OM1, OM2, do we just enter OM in once or twice? So you would enter it in twice. That would be your two proximal locations would be coded as obtuse marginal. To be clear, bypass OM1 and OM2 and OM3 would just be 3 entries that all say OM. That's correct. Each entry would say OM for that. Section J, what is an example of, right? So I'm not quite sure what the 11 none is for distal site, but I will let you know what we were thinking when we put that in there. Okay, we have struggled with capturing UDIs. Can you speak about the level of importance of this? How critical is it to capture UDI? So UDI is a number that's been mandated, or a device identifier that's been mandated by the FDA to be implemented in all of the devices and all that fit into the category of cardiovascular procedures, among others, but definitely in the cardiovascular space that are implanted into patients. It's a unique identifier that includes model number, serial number, and a couple other, manufacturer has some type of ID in there, and a couple other identifying factors that point to that specific device that's inserted into that patient. It's important to capture, and the FDA really would like that information. However, it's probably about 70 to 120 characters long, with letters and numbers and symbols and all kinds of crazy stuff in there. And we cannot expect data managers or can't expect anybody to go in and manually enter those numbers. And I actually recommend against manually entering those numbers. Some ORs, and probably most ORs, have the ability to scan those into the chart. And I suggest that you work with your OR team to ask that they start doing that if they are not, and they have the capability of doing that, so they can scan it in. And it fills, you know, it auto-populates into a field in your EHRs. But it's important, but it would be worse if they were entered manually into the computer, into your vendor software, and it was entered wrong. And I think it's crazy to even ask anybody to enter a 70 to 120 digit number in. So I think we've all agreed that it really needs to be scanned into the EHR, and you need to be able to pull that number over into your vendor software. Melinda, did you have anything to add on that one?
No, I'm sorry. I was struggling with my mute button. No, I think
That's
you
okay.
did a great job.
Okay. So the question here begin between autograft and homograft, and I believe autograft is related to the patient, and the homograft may be like a donor graft. But we can talk more, we can educate more on this on one of the upcoming webinars, unless you have anything to add that can quickly explain that, Melinda.
No, I'd rather do it in the training manual and get a good explanation. I think you did a nice quick explanation, but we can certainly get that in the training manual. I'm taking notes on that.
Okay, thank you. Next question, can you please repeat what you said about the valve fracturing procedures? Do they get captured in the STS database or TVT only? So sites do enter their TAV or TVT cases. They do enter their transcatheter valve cases into both databases. They're only required to be entered into the TVT, but sites do enter them into the STS adult cardiac as well. One of the parts of the procedure, which is the valve, which is sometimes done, is the valve fracturing procedure, where they open up that annulus a little bit bigger from a previous valve to implant a new valve. And that's specific, I believe, specific to transcatheter procedures. We do not capture that portion of the transcatheter procedure in the adult cardiac database. It is captured in the TVT database. So if you have a procedure and your site likes to capture all of your TVT, your transcatheter valve cases in both databases, you will not be able to capture the valve fracturing portion of that procedure in the STS adult cardiac database. When entering the data into the risk calculator, the version shows 2.9. Is there an upgraded risk calculator to use now to enter in the patient's data? No, this will get built out after. ARMIS is the one who manages the risk calculator, who has an agreement with STS to build the risk calculator, and they haven't yet been provided that information to build that calculator. They get certified first on their vendor software, and then once they're certified, they use that same logic to build the risk calculator, so it's not quite available. However, with that being said, the risk calculator hasn't changed. The risk models haven't changed between 2.9 and 4.2, so it should be pretty correct right now on the 2.9 calculator. Aortic valve replacement with root enlargement is an isolated aortic valve, correct? And I believe that's right, Melinda? We capture those as that would be the aortic, and is it the aortic enlargement part that gets put in there? They do a root enlargement.
The question I'm reading says aortic valve replacement with a root enlargement is an isolated AVR, correct? So if it's just an annular enlargement, not, so in my mind, I'm not sure who asked this question, but are you asking if they do a root procedure with it, or if they're just doing an annular enlargement? So,
yeah, if they do a root procedure needs to go into the aortic section, and I think that's the same thing as the major root reconstruction or debridement. If that's where you're going with that, then it has to go into the aorta section. But you're welcome to provide more information into the Q&A box so we can answer it correctly. If it's just an annular enlargement, it does not go into the aorta section. What about vasectomies for endocarditis? It's not the choice of the valve repair. So I think we capture, hold on one second. Let me scroll up here and see what we have. So we capture the endocarditis in the preoperative section, and we capture, we have leaflet debridement, pannus thrombus removal, and I think a vasectomy, is that, Melinda, would you call that one of these
I would probably
choices here?
put it, yeah, that's probably where I would put it right there.
Yeah, I would too. And we'll clarify that in the training manual. We can run it past the surgeons and make sure that we're right on there. I would say we would capture that you had the endocarditis at the beginning, you know, in the preoperative section, and that combination along with pannus or thrombus removal or leaflet debridement, leaflet shaving, one of these choices would be able to identify that that's the purpose of that procedure. Is the upgrade still planned for July 1st, 2020? Yep, the upgrade's still planned for July 1st, 2020. Can you show us where to access these recordings? For 4.20 on the STS website. Sure. So let me. I can do that pretty quickly here. So you're at the STS.org website under Registries and Research, the STS National Database, and scroll a little bit down, about halfway down the page, and you'll see the View Webinars link. This will take you to the current list of webinars that are planned. We have 4, and I'll talk a second about these new data managers webinars. We haven't had any of those yet, but the recordings are listed here under the past ACSD webinars. We have an ACSD webinar YouTube playlist link, which is here, and it will take you to all of the webinars related to the adult cardiac. The most recent ones are easily accessible right below it. So we started these 4.20 upgrade calls in February, so the first one is still listed here. So that's where you find that at.
Hi, Carol. This is Leanne. I also put that link to the YouTube playlist in the chat box for anyone that may want to copy and paste from that.
Oh, thanks. That's great. Thank you. Okay. Is the Carpentier class for mitral valve still included? So we went over that Carpentier classification last call, and we are still collecting Carpentier class. We are going to start again collecting Carpentier classification for mitral valves. Are there any plans for adding an Edwards and Spears aortic valve to the valve list? So if you look into the training manual, you would see that this was addressed in the training manual under the aortic valve list. And it says that, I'd be happy to pull it up here for you to show you where to find that information, to see that it was addressed, and it has been addressed in there since I think November of 2018. So let me show you where to find that information. That's why it's important when you find something like this to go to the training manual and see what it says, to see, so you're not wondering and not thinking that we're not doing something about it. I think this was section. The short answer while I get there is yes. The valve lists get updated every upgrade. If there's, and we reach out to the vendors and we ask them for their valve list, and we ask them to provide any valves that they may have coming out that maybe are not FDA yet approved by the FDA or newly approved by the FDA that we didn't have in the last upgrade. We ask them to provide that list, and if they don't provide us with the list, we have to go off of what we have. So when this valve was approved, which was, it was already being tested and not yet approved by FDA, but in the, in the research phase, almost approved, they didn't tell us that it was there. So we couldn't add it if we didn't know. So when it got approved, we got a bunch of questions that said, I want to put this valve in, and how come I can't put this valve in, and all of this. So we will update it, but we instructed sites in the training manual to code other FDA approved valve for this valve. Let's see if I can find it here. Do you know the sequence number, Melinda?
I'm looking
Okay.
right at the top of my head, no.
But I probably get a couple emails a month about this valve and what to do with it. And I want to be kind to everybody, but I also want people to know that they need to refer to the training manual in this, because oftentimes they're not the only site that has been affected. And if it's not in the training manual, so please reach out.
Try 3480. Try 3480 and see if that
Okay.
will bring it up. Or 3472. It's going to, somewhere in that area.
Yep, here it is.
I just saw it in green. You passed it. There it is. Under the intent.
Yeah. So it's specific in here somewhere about that valve. I'm not sure.
It's
exactly
under
where
the
it's at.
intent, Carol, in
Oh,
green.
this one here.
Yeah,
Okay.
right there.
Yeah, so the device list will be updated by the vendors with the specification upgrades. Devices not listed should be entered as other FDA approved or other non-FDA approved devices and enter the UDI will allow for valve identification. So that's one of them that we've had in there for quite a while, and hopefully that answers your question. Will you add tetralogy if below repairs a previous cardiac procedure? It's difficult to select each part of this repair individually from the choices when a patient has had one of these in the past. I don't know that we've added that in the previous cardiac section.
We haven't, and in the past we've just instructed sites to capture this as a congenital repair in previous CV interventions.
Great, thank you. Can you add lung transplant as an option? Nancy, can you clarify what you mean by lung transplant? Where are you looking to have that added? Provide it in the Q&A for us, please. I know I've sent in questions. In version 2.9 about the AngioVac device. Is this going to be anywhere? And I know we've talked about this, Melinda. Can you remember what the surgeon said on this one?
We're not collecting those.
Okay, thank you. That's what I thought. I didn't want to say it without checking with you. All right. When will this data collection form be considered final? I'd like to know when it is safe to forward to my CT surgeons for their knowledge. You're welcome to forward it now. It's considered final. The vendors are building off of it. There are times where even after we go live that there may be a major issue. Hopefully there's not, but you know, we consider it final now. And if there's any changes, we'll let you know, but we're not anticipating any. When will software certification be completed for the vendors? The goal is to have all of that. They should be receiving the test files for software certification in the next week or so. I think by the end of the week they should have them, which is tomorrow. So maybe tomorrow or Monday. And then they'll go into the testing phase. And so they'll go into the testing phase and then they'll be able to get certified. Where do you find the UDI? Should we put in the serial number? So the serial number is not the same as the UDI. The UDI is made up, part of the UDI is the serial number, but it also includes things like the model number, the size, and perhaps industry identifier.
There's a nice diagram, I think, in the beginning of the training manual that shows you what a UDI looks like.
Oh yeah, let me get up there.
And just a couple of things. In version 2.9, we had some issues with the format not being long enough, so you couldn't enter everything in. There weren't enough characters, but in the new version, that's been fixed, so you can enter all the parentheses in and all the characters and everything. The format has been corrected.
Yeah, so here's an example of what a UDI looks like, and it's made up of an expiration date, a manufacturing date, a lot number, and serial number. So it's kind of a combination of a whole bunch of things, and it's too difficult to be typing that in, and it's prone to error if you are typing it in manually. So it's better if you can get these scanned in in your OR. It's on the devices. It's on each device package. It was a requirement, I think, that it had to be a requirement from the FDA that had to be completed either last year or the year before, and for all devices that were inserted into a patient's regarding the CV surgery. Not just CV surgery, but others. CV surgery was one of the groups that this was a requirement for.
So Carol, since we're on this subject, I see a little further down, a lot of hospitals are having struggles with getting this scanned in so that it goes into the vendor. What's the recommendation, or do we even have one? Because we only talked about it. If the scan can't occur and they can't make it happen, should we have sites enter this manually, or thoughts? I see the question as we're scanning the questions here a little further down.
Which one? I'm sorry, Melinda, can you say that again?
Well, there's some hospitals that are having trouble with the scanning system so that this number won't go into the software. And I think the data managers want to know, would we want them to enter this manually in those situations?
No, I don't think it's right to be entering these in manually. I think they're too long and prone to error.
Okay.
Do you agree? I think our surgeons even agreed. I think it's crazy to enter. I mean, these can go all the way from 70 to 120 digits. And to try to read that little thing, those little numbers, in the hope to get it right.
I think that's a great point, and it's a great question that they brought up, and something we can address in the training manual.
Yeah, absolutely. We certainly should. Yeah. The next question is, where can we find out what risk factors are going into the risk score for the new version? So the risk models have not changed. The risk models, the risk model for 4.20 will still be the risk models that were used for version 2.9. So those risk factors have not changed. Our scanning system cannot capture the UDI. This is a real challenge for us and something I've been working with. Yep. What is STS using the UDI for? Is it reported back to the FDA with patient info? No, we don't report anything back to the FDA with patient info, but we do use it to track devices. This is another way to identify the device when it was entered, the size of the device. It's another device indicator that we use, and that we use to assess the types of devices and their outcomes related to surgery. Anytime I ask about the UDI to surgery, they have no idea what it is or where to find it. So why don't you can take them. I think we have a nice link, Melinda, that we can provide from the FDA website about what the UDI is. It's on the device packaging, and they probably just don't recognize it. Let's see if I can find one. And the FDA has a nice website. It explains pretty much everything that you need to know about UDIs, but it would look something like this. I know that Dorothy also had a nice picture. Here's a Medtronic one. This is a cervical disc, but probably close to the same format that they probably put on some of their other products. And it's this long number here, so you have, different information, and then the UDI is listed here. So that's kind of what it looks like, and it should be on all of the devices that are implanted into patients. Okay. So it says we do have the UDI number scanned into the EHR. It is available, but it doesn't auto-populate into the vendor software. Is that still okay for us to leave blank? Is it still okay for us to leave it blank? If you're able to copy and paste it from the from the EHR into the vendor software, I think that's fine. I wouldn't try to transcribe it though, because I think you can transpose numbers that way. What do you think about that one, Melinda?
I think there's a lot of questions as I'm reading through about that, and I think maybe I can see it both ways. And so I think maybe we need to ask the surgeons to get a final answer on this, It's a great point that's not been brought up before, and I think it's something that we probably need to just say, ask the surgeons, do you want this manually being entered if it can't be scanned
Yeah,
in?
we can bring it back to them. We did already ask them that on a core call, and
Oh,
they
did
said
we?
no. Yeah,
Okay.
I don't know if you were on it or if it was a conversation that Donna and I had with them, but they had said no, that they did not want it manually entered in. There's way too many. I mean, 70 to 120 digits is prone to human error so easily, and you can see how small these numbers are. So entering that number in, it is important, but it's also important that it's entered in correctly. You can provide the UDI to us, but if it's incorrect, it doesn't serve us any good. So it's better to have a surefire way to get that information in instead of hoping that our fingers and eyes are connecting correctly. But we can definitely provide further clarity in the training manual. We talked about this also at AQO last year. So I'm happy to go back and get clarity from them again on this. But I think that it's better to not to enter it in if it's any chance of getting it wrong.
Agreed. I've missed that call, so I agree with you. The surgeons don't want it entered manually, then we shouldn't do that. And the important thing here is we need to put it in the training manual so that everybody knows that.
Yeah, I agree. There was mention at a prior conference that aortic procedures may have a risk model in the future. Is this a foreseen time? Is there a foreseen time when this may occur? So they're still looking at data within the Quality Metrics Task Force. The Quality Metrics Task Force is the arm of the quality department, or the arm of the databases that work on developing risk models and all of this. So we have to get enough data, and we should have enough data to build risk models. They are starting that process, and I'm not sure when they will be available, but hopefully within the next year or two, we should have some aorta risk models available. It's going to be different than any of the other risk models that we've seen because of the combination of procedures that can be performed on the aorta. So it's probably going to take a little bit more time to build than a typical isolated CAB or isolated aortic valve model. But they are coming, and we'll keep you updated with that information. Okay, how will COVID-19 questions responses be used for outcome report analysis when mortality metrics factor in COVID-19? We don't know. We haven't gotten enough data yet on that. We haven't even had a harvest with that data to even analyze it. So we have to see how that looks, and it probably won't be until the latter half of the year. Actually, probably the last quarter of the year, we'll be able to provide some more information on that, how that's going to affect the analysis for the database. Is the FDA looking at our data for the UDI? No, we don't share any data with the FDA. And if we did share any data with the FDA, it would be de-identified, but we're not collecting this for the FDA. We're collecting it because the FDA says that we should collect it, but not for FDA purposes. They just would like us to, this is a way to identify those devices. In addition to the model number, it's more specific, and you can then look at not just the model number, but you can look at more specific things like where you can connect, you can link the patient with the risk factors and things like that, not identified in any way or sharing their information with the FDA. I meant enlargement, not with aortic procedure. So thank you. So that would just be the annulus enlargement would still just be captured in the aortic valve section, not in the aorta section.
And it keeps the patient in the isolated cab if it's just an annular enlargement, the isolated AVR. So I think that was the second part of her question.
Okay, thank you. And here's some clarification from Cindy. Autograft is a patient's native valve removed from its native position and implanted into another position. An example is a Ross procedure in which the pulmonic valve is removed from its position and implanted into the aortic valve position. Thank you, Cindy. Another comment from Cindy, many doctors use the terminology aortic root replacement, but they are really really doing an annular enlargement. So data managers need to consult with their surgeons before entering into the database. And that's a great point, Cindy. Thank you. So if you're confused on what your surgeons are charting, or it seems like they're charting something that doesn't match the terminology that we capture in the database, please reach out to them and work with them to ensure that you're capturing their cases correctly. Is there a webinar for the Bentel procedure? No, we don't have a webinar for the Bentel procedure, but that is something we can consider, and we would probably consider doing it on the whole aorta section, which would include the Bentel procedures. Per STS FAQ, AVR plus aorta wrap would be an isolated AVR. How do we code this? The aortic aneurysm was repaired by aortic wrap. I don't think we don't capture that, right, Melinda?
No, we don't capture wrapping. The surgeons don't consider that a procedure.
Right. Thank you. If staff that abstracts and enters our STS data are to be furloughed in the next 2 weeks, what are the recommendations for sites that will not have staff in place to switch to new version on July 1st? I don't know. I guess we'll have to get there when we come to it. That's quite a ways away. It's 2 months away. So let's hope for the best on that. In the other category or its own specific category, as our surgeons do OLT, not GT. I'm not sure what that means. Do you know what she's talking about, Melinda?
No, and I'm trying to remember what her original question was. We've been through so many questions. I'm sorry, Nancy. Will you just send this in to me on the FAQ? I'll be happy to answer it for you.
Sorry, Nancy. Oh, I guess we're at time. I didn't even realize we were at time. Let's do 2 more. Would lung transplant be captured under the non-cardiac section as thoracic? That's correct, right, Melinda? Other non-cardiac? We haven't even gotten there yet, though.
Would lung transplant be captured under non-cardiac section as thoracic? Yeah, that would be a thoracic procedure.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. Okay. I get most of these are UDI questions. Again, I wouldn't type in the UDI unless and there's no unless on that. I think if it's not scanned into the chart and you can copy and paste it into the vendor software, or your vendor software allows for this field to be automatically entered from the EHRs into the vendor software, this is one of those fields that we allow for automated abstraction. If your vendors do not allow that, or there's not a way to copy and paste it from the EHRs into the vendor software, I would not be typing in a 120 or 70-digit number into your vendor software and hoping that it's right every time. It can cause more issues than not if we're not 100% accurate on that field. So if you're not able to 100% ensure that you are not making a mistake, I would not do it. Okay. I guess that's it. We've got a lot of UDI questions, but I hope that was helpful. We can revisit that section again. I just want to make sure I don't have anything. There's a question in here about a left videoscopic assisted thoracoscopic surgery with creation of a pericardial window, placement of a left atrial appendage AtriCure clip to ligate the left atrial appendage. I would submit this one into the FAQ so Melinda can answer it, because I think we probably need to take that one back to the surgeons just to be sure that we're correct on it. And I think we're good. I think that looks like, oh, here, one more. This will be the last one. If we have a lima with a saphenous vein extension to distal, would we code both internal mammary portion and the vein portion? Would we code both the internal mammary portion and the vein graft section for the same graft? So you would still code the internal mammary that an internal mammary was used, but when you get down to the counts, I'm going to have to make sure that this isn't going to throw anything off, but when you get down to the accounting, so you capture yes that an internal mammary was used, and then we get down to the total number of distal anastomoses with arterial grafts. You're going to select, if this was the only graft that was put in, you're going to select no, because you did not have a distal anastomosis with an arterial graft. You had a distal anastomosis with a venous conduit. So for that graft where it was the first proximal portion was arterial, and the second portion, the distal portion, was venous. You're going to capture that as a distal anastomosis with the venous conduit. All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining. I hope you stay well and take care of yourself and each other. Thank you, Melinda, for helping and for helping me answer these questions. And hopefully I didn't screw up too much this time.
Oh, you did wonderful. It's just hard to do live. We appreciate everybody's patience.
Yeah, thank you. All right, thanks, everybody. Take care. And our next webinar, oops, hold on. I'm going to pull it up here. And don't forget to check the calendar, the websites before, so we don't guide you wrong, or so that something doesn't come up and we have to change the time. Make sure that you check. Oh, my screen's going to freeze. Make sure that you do check the. Oh, I just went live on YouTube. Didn't mean to do that. Hold on. There's so many things going on. Make sure that you check the website ahead of time to ensure that we are still on time for that we still are still on time for the calls that are planned. Our next monthly call is May 6th, and I'm not quite sure what we're going to talk about, but Melinda and I are going to come up with some educational information to talk about on that call, which is next Wednesday. And I'm looking forward to it. If you have any ideas that something you'd like to learn, feel free to shoot me an email, and we'll try to go cover it on that webinar. IQVIA does not still have a update for the release of the Harvest 1 data through Q4 2019. So we don't have a dashboard to display yet, but maybe we can talk to them as well and get an update, a live update from them. So I guess we're good to go. If you need to reach me, my email is ccrone@sts.org. And thanks again for joining in. I hope you take care. Thanks, Melinda.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.